10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 269. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 269 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Welcome into all of you, and thank you so much for joining us yet again on another episode. This week we are going to continue our Triad workout, and we're going to be looking at groupings of 4 notes instead of triplets as we did last week. But before we jump into the show, just wanted to let you know that you can get all the exercises that I am presenting to you in this week's episode, plus exercises for every single other episode that we've ever done on the show by supporting us on Patreon. We are a listener-supported podcast. That means we don't have any advertisements on the show. And the reason the show keeps coming at you week in and week out is because of listeners like you. So for a small fee every month, you can get all of the materials that we present to you on the show and a lot of other benefits over there. So I wanted to give a shout out to some new patrons. Thank you to our new $3 patrons, Margaret, Michael, and Urs. Thank you guys so much for joining up, and to the over 300 members that we have over there, thank you for supporting us for so long. You can get yourself signed up and get instant access to all the materials by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up today. Okay, so last week we talked about an interesting chromatic major triad exercise. If you haven't listened to that, go and check it out. That's episode 268, because we're going to be building on that this week. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to take all of the same concepts that we talked about last week, but now we're going to play in groupings of 4. So we start with the triads because it is the easiest and most sensical way of outlining a triad. A triad is obviously 3 notes, so playing it as a triplet means that we can confine that triad to 1 beat. So that's how I like to start with all my students when we start talking about triads. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to study how to do the same exercise, but use a 4-note triad. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, what the heck is a 4-note triad? It's called a triad, right? We've already talked about the fact that it's only 3 notes. But we can easily accomplish this goal of playing it in a grouping of 4 by simply doubling the note that we start on. And this makes sense for a whole bunch of reasons. One of the first reasons is that if we only have triplets available to us to express triads, that's going to get old really, really quickly. So we want to have the flexibility of using the triplets and then also using other rhythms. What we're going to study this week is an 8th note rhythm. So if you look at your first exercise on the PDF that accompanies this week's episode, you're going to see we have an exercise that's built off of 4-note triads. So if you look at the first one, we have a concert C major triad. And what we're doing is we're playing root, 3rd, 5th, and then the root again, an octave up from there. So that's how we're accomplishing this 4-note grouping of a triad, and all the exercises are going to be based off of that. Now, throughout this entire episode, we are only going to be doubling the root because we are trying to present the most basic form of these exercises, and we're going to start every key on the root, and we're also going to end that 4-note grouping on the root. Upcoming episodes, we're going to talk about how to develop even more flexibility with these triads by not starting on the root. Because if you always start on the root, your solos, again, they get boring really quick. They become predictable. We know you're going to start on the root. But for now, when you're first getting into this stuff and you're kind of learning the ropes and you're practicing these exercises, it's okay to just start on the root. I want you to get used to playing it in all 12 keys first, get a good handle on what the triad is in every key. Then you can start to switch things up. Okay, so let's take a look at our first exercise. So what we're doing is we're cycling through all 12 keys very rapidly, one after another, no rests, no time to catch your breath. You've got to just go through everything. And what we're doing is we're playing an ascending triad, and we're also ascending through the keys. So it's a double ascending movement. Now, when I play the exercise for you, it's going to be just like last week's exercises. I wrote it going up for you, but you are responsible for coming down. And here's how you accomplish coming down your instrument with this exercise. You're going to keep the triad ascending, so you're not going to change the direction of each individual triad, but you are going to start descending down your instrument. And that's going to completely change things. So remember, the direction of the triad never changes. It's just the direction on the instrument that does change. You're basically playing the exercise backward, but you're still playing that ascending triad. So let's hear what this exercise number 1 sounds like. So you can hear that whether I'm going in an overall direction up or down, the triad is always going 1, 3, 5, 1, ascending. Now, a couple of tricky things about this exercise that weren't really present in last week's exercises. Because we're playing the 4-note exercise, the interval between the keys is much, much, much wider. So if you look at the last note of the first triad and the first note of the second triad, you'll notice that I'm jumping down a major 7th. Now, on a lot of instruments, this might not be that tricky. Like if you're playing piano or you're playing guitar, it might not be that hard to jump that major 7th, but on a wind instrument, right, a brass instrument or a woodwind, it's really difficult to do that. In fact, you can hear me struggling a little bit with it when I'm playing the exercise. So this is going to be really good for you, both on a triad level, getting those skills down, and then also on an instrumental level if you play an instrument where that jump is really tough to accomplish. So this is really going to do a lot for you as a jazz musician and as an instrumentalist. All right, let's go on to exercise number 2. So exercise number 2 is the polar opposite of exercise number 1. Now we are descending the triad while we're ascending the instrument. So we've just flipped it on its head, right? All the triads are descending while we're going up the instrument. Then we flip it, right? So this is the part that's not written. So you're going to come back down the instrument using a descending triad. It's going to be a little bit easier on the way down than it was on the way up. The way up is the tough part on this one. Again, we have that huge interval. So if you look at exercise number 2, last note of the first triad going into the first note of the second triad, now we have to jump up a minor 9th. And that is really, really tough to do on a lot of these instruments. So again, it is really going to challenge your ability to play wide intervals on your instrument, which is going to be so fantastic for you in so many different ways. Let's check out what exercise number 2 sounds like. Now, you can really hear how the four note groupings really change the character of these exercises, and that's kind of what we're going for here, right? We want it to sound like a completely different exercise with the way that it lines up with the metronome. So that's going to be really good for you. All right, the third exercise is my favorite. This is where we combine ascending and descending into one exercise. And it actually makes the exercise a little bit easier because the transition between the keys is only a half step rather than that major seventh or that minor ninth. It's really going to make things a lot easier. But here's the thing, resist the temptation to play the third exercise only. You have to practice those first two exercises, fight through those large intervals, be able to identify each triad in that format before you go on to exercise number 3. But exercise number 3 is going to be really fun by the time you get there. So you have that to look forward to after you've practiced those harder exercises, which are 1 and 2. Now, another thing that I want you to study about the way the descending half of this exercise happens is that every triad that I was ascending on the way up, I'm now descending on the way down. So what that does, just like last week, is it makes sure that you are able to ascend and descend every single triad. You're not leaving anything unstudied when you're playing this exercise. So you'll notice on the way up, my concert C major triad is ascending. And then in the second half of the exercise, you're going to notice that that same concert C triad is descending now. So it's just the way that the exercise is written that we're going to flip everything on its head when we come down. Now, another thing that I really like to do with this exercise, and I suggest you do this if you're looking for something that's a little bit more advanced and you're feeling good about the way that you're playing this, is I'll play it as eighth notes, and then I will play it double time as 16th notes. And this is the way that I really, really test myself. So let's hear it as eighth notes first. I love playing that exercise. It is so fun. And then once I feel really good about that, I'm going to challenge myself to play it twice as fast while keeping the metronome at the same pace. I am just thinking 16th notes in my head when I'm playing it rather than eighth notes. And this is a great way to test your ability to play this. Do you really know it, or do you only know it well enough to be able to play it at that slower tempo? Here's what it sounds like twice as fast. All right, so major extra credit if you can do that thing double time, and even more extra credit if you can do it double time without looking at the page. That is really kind of the ultimate. Is it ingrained enough that you can do it without looking at the exercise and do it at that double time tempo? That would be so good for you. So we've got our triplet chromatic triads, and now we've got our 4-note chromatic triads. And now we're kind of ready for the next step, which is what we're going to talk about on parts 3 and 4 of this series next month. We're going to do our lick of the month next week, and then we're going to do our tune of the month the week after that. So you've got some time to practice this before part 3 comes out. So really get on your instrument, start working on these, make these 2 patterns happen before we get to parts 3 and 4, which are going to be much more complicated. So remember to grab the PDF by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and you will get all the exercises that we have talked about on this episode instantly as soon as you sign up. Let me know if you have any questions. Great place to get in touch with me is the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can always email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Hope you are all doing well out there, staying safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week with another brand new episode of the show. Have a good weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.